Back in the old days when I frequented the Telegraph blog section before it became just another vanilla yawn fest, the endless regurgitation of the Stephen Lawrence murder by the establishment began to become something of a running joke. As soon as one inquiry turned up nothing, a new investigation would be launched into why nothing new would be found in the previous one, and that in itself would trigger a whole new set of investigations. And so it went. The implication, and then via the Macpherson report, accusation, was that the entire British police service was institutionally racist. If institutional racism was not found, then it was simply a sign of the racism being so pervasive that it warranted yet another investigation. In the meantime, Lawrence's mother was wafted into the House of Lords despite having no qualifications whatsoever. But it didn't matter. A narrative was being crafted from on high, and such petty issues could be shelved. In Tom Wolfe's Bonfire of the Vanities, Wolfe writes brilliantly of the District Attorney Weiss, of course, obsessing over finally landing the great white defendant. The New York justice and penal system is essentially a meat grinder which mechanically processes Latinos and blacks into the prison complex. Weiss yearns for the day when, finally, a well-heeled white Anglo-Saxon male lands in his clutches. This is what the Stephen Lawrence murder meant to the British liberal classes and establishment, except in reverse. Here, finally, they had a black victim of a white knife attack, and they were never, ever, ever going to allow the native British population to forget it. Not ever. It was the Macpherson report and its findings which broke the British police and led them into a tragic maelstrom of getting jiggy with it at the Notting Hill Carnival, the transgender indoctrination, the turning a blind eye to so-called Islamic rape gangs, the general shambles of the force today. However, the purpose of the endless investigations was to keep the memory of St. Stephen alive in the minds of the public. It was to instill guilt and shame. It was so the Liberals could prove themselves correct that every white man is a racist psycho waiting to murder innocent black teenagers. It didn't matter that Chris Donald was castrated and burned alive by Asians, Pakistanis. It didn't matter that Lee Rigby was beheaded in broad daylight or that Charlene Downs' DNA was found in kebab meat. What mattered was the narrative. Through endless repetition, Stephen Lawrence was promoted from being a tragic case to an example of the race hate in every white British heart, up into martyrdom and eventually becoming a one-man Treblinka, a veritable weapon of white guilt, mass destruction and self-loathing. It was the Macpherson report which killed off the British Bobby and replaced him with an ideological cook. The Met was neutral, but certain parties, especially the Runnymede Trust, dedicated themselves to proving that it was racist. The Bobbies would try and prove their innocence, but that was just a sign that they were in denial about their racism, and so the witch hunt gathered even more momentum until eventually it became impossible to police non-white ethnic groups. And while the so-called Muslim grooming issue of English girls was happening before Macpherson, Macpherson made it a career killer to point out that non-white ethnic groups could be less than angelic. And anyway, why bother reporting anything when the higher-ups would simply throw the report down the memory hole in case the Witchfinder General came after them too? And when the news finally broke, the scale of exploitation of English girls finally started to trickle into the light. The filth who brought this upon us did a switcheroo. What about Jimmy Savile? Don't you know that most sexual assaults are carried out by white men? Race isn't a factor here. Race isn't important, they told us. The same people who just ushered in St. Stephen Lawrence Day because of a racially motivated crime tell us the mass rape of our own girls isn't a matter of race and that we're just individuals. By this same standard, what does it matter that Stephen Lawrence was murdered by white racists? Don't black people stab each other every day? In fact, aren't most black murderers committed by black men? This is their standard. This is their moral code, except when it's a problem for them. Except when the victims are white, then it disappears. A society doesn't become this insane by itself. It can become decadent. It can become cruel. But it won't invert morality against itself like ours has without outside meddling. There's a species of ant in the Amazon, which gets targeted by a type of fungus. Ants out foraging become infected by the spores, and when they return to the nest, they attack their own and weaken the defences of their main base. People view this behaviour as totally bizarre, but eventually when the whole nest was destroyed, they looked inside, and deep inside the nest, in the warmth and moisture, they found lots of little fungus plants growing safely. It's worth thinking about, isn't it? Thank you very much for listening, everybody, and I'll see you later.